Okay, Kum Len in Ablat Gemara. We are up to Masechta Sukah Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. The very top line. We are learning different dinim that disqualify an esrog. So the Gemara says, quoting the Mishnah, Nizdik. In the Mishnah, it says that if, for example, there was a crack, we'll soon see what a crack actually means. But if there was a split in the esrog, or if there was a puncture in the esrog, and the Mishnah then says, and something was missing, and we're learning that it's exactly one case, a puncture with something missing, because the Mishnah contrasts that later with a puncture that nothing is missing, which is kosher. So it says, what's when we say a puncture? Now there's big machlekes on how to learn pshat. We're going to learn like Rashi. If there was a puncture, when we say that it's a puzzle, he says here. So you're saying that if there's a puncture, and the second part of the mission is that nothing is missing. If nothing is missing, then it is kosher. Says the Gemara. You know when we say that nothing is kosher? Only, we'll see in a minute. Nikiv, Nikiv, nekev, mefulish. If let's say you have a puncture that goes through and through. So when the Mishnah says that is kosher, that if it's nevertheless, if the puncture goes from one side of the esrog to the other side, even though nothing is missing, you're just like pressed in, it is puzzle. The mashu, it passes even though mashu. So this is a chumrah. What he's coming along is being machman. Not like some other shaynim want to learn that he's being make. When we say it's puzzle, only if it goes through and through. He's saying no. When it's kosher, it's only if it didn't go through and through, but it pierces both sides of the esrog, even though nothing is missing. Or is the mashu, no matter how small, tiny the hole is. Even let's say a needle that just went through, or she'enim foolish if there was a puncture but it didn't pierce all the way through, then it just pressed. But if it's the size of a coin known as an isser, or larger or greater, then even though nothing is missing, the esrog is still possible. It's still possible. So that's a question. So that's a chumrah. That's a chumrah. And then we start talking about the shame as well. What happens if it pierces through and it goes into the chamber where all the seeds are? Then perhaps it's possible as well, because that's considered through and through. Even though it didn't go to the other side of the esrog, it went into the different area of the esrog. And so I'm saying about a boy, as a question, what about no esrog? What about the esrog has some of the signs which, if it would have been an animal, this would have been considered treif. We'll soon see what we're talking about. What would it be by regarding an esrog? So what exactly is this question? Because most of them are dealt with already. We're talking about peeling today. We learned already at the top of the page, and we said that if the entire animal is peeled, if the entire esrog is peeled, it's kosher. If part of the esrog is peeled, so it looks bad as possible, which is exactly the opposite of a treif. We learned that already. Treif is all the way around. The entire skin is peeled. It's the leather, the outside skin is peeled. It's treif, but if only parts of it, we say can grow back. If we're talking about that it's split again, Tanina, we learned it very clearly as well. It says in the Mishnah where the din is that's possible. If it's talking about a puncture again, then you will learn the Mishnah detail, depending on I'm missing. His question is in a case of like Ula. What's the case of Ula? He said, Ula's a name Rabbi Yechon. Reya, you have lungs, shenishpecha kikita, by an animal. You have lungs, but the inside of the animal, all those capillaries, all those air sacs that are inside. If you look inside a lung, you have like these like branches and a smaller branch and then even smaller branches. So the different names, the bronchial, the bronchiolus, and then you have the air sacs on the bottom, or the alveoli.
It looks a bit like a sponge, doesn't it?
Turned into mush. It became watery. If these little air sacs at the end became watery, it can spill out internally, but the external part of the lung is intact. Everything is the same. What's the din? So Ula said that is kosher. What about an esrog? The esrog, the outside, external esrog, everything is all right, but inner cavity, everything is mush, liquidy. The Rava says, Rava says, what do we say that even though the whole thing turned into mush, if only the flesh turned into mush, but then the simpoin is those little ear sacs, they did not turn into mush. They remained intact. So then it's kosher. But if those ear sacs fall apart as well, then the whole thing is treif. So hachamai. What would it then be by an esrog as well in the same situation? What's the shayla? Why should it be any different than there? So we say as follows. No, was it inner? If, for example, the whole flesh of the inside of the esrog became mush, but the seeds remained intact. What would it then be here? Why should it be any different than over there? So I can argue as follows. Dilma Hasam with the over there, it's inside the body, inside the lung, and therefore it has not affected by the outside air. Therefore, how the body, there's a hope that eventually it will recover, it will heal. Therefore, that's why it's kosher. If all of these branches are intact, it's kosher. Over here, the essig gets vulnerable to the elements. Therefore, perhaps over here it will go off. It will decay and no good. A demolition makes no difference. There's no difference in essig and the lung. That's my question. So
how would you know it's possible without actually opening up the essig, which makes it possible anyway?
Good question. Either maybe there's some telltale signs on the outside or some other estrogim on the tree. That you open a few other estrogim and you saw that's what happens. So you can assume that this essig is the same. Or maybe when you shake it, you can actually hear things moving inside. Says the Gemara. Okay, I'll bring you a brayse. Let's see the brayse. It says the brayse esek tefuach. Esek tefuach normally means swollen. We'll see what it means. And saruach means it became rotten, foul. And we'll see the difference between the two. Kavud, if it was marinated in vinegar, for example, as Rashi says, or shalok, it was stewed, an essig that was stewed, or kushi, or for example, if the essig was, let's say, kushi. From kushi is black, or we'll see maybe it's from Ethiopia, and lavan if it's white, wrong color. Or menumer, for example, it has all these polka dots, has all these dots on it. All the blotches, puzzle, it is puzzle. Then the Bible will come back to the tefuach haseruach. Eser kikadu, if it's shaped like a round circle, puzzle is puzzle. The yeshem, others say af hatiyan, if it's like two esser, double esser growing together, also is puzzle. Esrig habboiser, an esrig the size of an Egyptian bean, Rabbi Kiva Paisel Chachamim Machshir. Taisa doesn't like the pshat the way Rashi learns. That's talking about the size. We already had a machlekes before. Remember the size of a nut, the size of an egg. He said you're talking about over here. It could be much bigger, but boisa means it's only a third of the way ripe. It's not yet ripe. It's a question of ripe. It's not a question of size. Size we already had a machlekes and made Rabbi Yehuda before. And even actually seems to maybe over here lend himself a little bit to that pshat. Rabbi Kiva says pasol chachamim machshir. What about godly bitfus? You put it into a form, so therefore you alter the shape of the esrik. It should suit this form. But also give me beyachet. He's made like some other creature, other form. Puzzle is puzzle. Now we'll address most of the case in the brayse, but first let's go back to our original point that we're trying to bring out. Telling me to learn tafuach. Saruach, we learned there's two separate cases. One is tefuach and one is saruach. What's the difference? My love, tefuach is with bechutz. Tefuach means somehow or another rotted on the outside, and saruach means mebifnim. Saruach is the same thing, rotted, but internally. So if you ask the question, what happens if the outside is all right, and internally it rotted? So this is like the case of the lung, and it seems to me that it's possible. Here's the answer. So, no, look, you can't bring it out from me. Maybe they're both talking about on the outside. No, boss. Like kasha. Oh, here's talking about the tough. It swelled. Afagab the loisar than rat. So Rashi says in the first chapter, for example, it rained on it, and when it rains, it begins to swell. And sarach, it means it rots. Two different things, but they're both external. We're not talking about a case where externally it's intact and internally something it fell apart. The sorach, and here's talking about sorach. It rotted out, so I've got like tougher, but it didn't swell. So either one passes, but we're not talking about the internal at all. Rashi has another pshat that tafach means that it rotted, and sorach means foul. Foul means a pungent smell, and that's two different because worms ate it or something. Amama, we learned. By the way, we learned before about holes. In Shulchan Aruch, we actually paskin the Ramah paskin working Allah l'maisa. If you have holes in the esrig from things that naturally happen when it grows, like the twigs that are pointy, go into the esrig and cause holes, that is not a psul. That's not a psul, which is abnormal for an esrig to have this kind of a psul. Oh my God! Before esrig, because you're dark esrig, possible. I've been telling them
isn't that the same they call something Yiddish a blettel? In other words, if a twig or
a blettel
pressed onto it.
A blettel is a discoloring, like if a leaf covers over it, so therefore the color of that part of the esrig is different than another part. And the blettel sometimes can even have a little bit of mamashas. That's called a blettel, yeah. But we're talking about punctures. Let is not punctures. So the Gemara, acid kushi possible, dark acid is possible. She said the brayse. I will tell another brayse, kushi kosher. The dark acid is actually kosher. Doimel the kushi possible. But if it grew, let's say in Etzisro, and it's similar to the srigim that grow in Ethiopia, then it's possible. I'm going to buy you, right? When it says over here that all of these psulim is talking about when it says kushi is possible, meaning in other words, an essig in Etzisro, when it grows totally out of place, it's possible. But Esther Kushi, which is perfectly common to be an Esther Kushi, it's not a problem, it's kosher. Tomorrow will soon explain. Okay, so again, so if an essay grows elsewhere, that's totally kushas black, that's not normal. That's possible. But we're all the circular black, it's all right. So the Gemara, how long the who we're talking about black, but nevertheless it depends. To people in Israel that live very far from Ethiopia, and therefore they don't normally use that kind of essay. So even though it grew in Ethiopia, it's not a question of where the essay grew. The question is where you're benching the essay. In other words, Abaye is saying it depends where the essay grew. If it grew in Ethiopia, it's normal. If it grew in Israel, it's not normal. But I was saying, okay, where it grew? If you're using it in Israel, which is not normal to in Israel, because people in Israel are very far from Ethiopia, they don't normally use that kind of essay. So therefore, it's not harder. It's a nice thing, cannot use it. But if you're in Bavel, which is much closer to Kush, and therefore they're used to that kind of essay, for them it's kosher. Exactly how Bavel, Iraq, is closer to Ethiopia than the Israel is hard to understand. However, I told you last time, I didn't see Meforshim here say it, but I saw Gila and other places that sometimes Kush doesn't mean Ethiopia. Kush can mean the Kush Mountains. And the Kush Mountains is a lot closer to Iraq than it is to Israel. And maybe that's what it means over here when it says, Rashi says that Kush, that Eretz Kush, which normally translates Ethiopia, he says here, B'nei Bavel shekroivim l'Kush, with a gilum be'er. How are they craving the Kush? And even if you take a map and you make it a straight line or something, and you find that maybe Ethiopia is slightly closer to Iraq than to Israel, but they're not close. They wouldn't be bringing from there. But if you're learning from the Kush Mountains around that area, then maybe it is closer. Not sure. This essay that is like the Egyptian bean, Chachamim say that it's kosher and Kiva is possible. And Rabbi Shimon both say the same thing, but something which is not mature. Rabbi Kiva or the Amr, we just learned. An essay that is a boiser is no good. So that's one thing Rabbi Kiva said. And what did Rabbi Shimon say? Rabbi Shimon said the following. Rabbi Shimon said, Shimon says that Sreigim are potter, if they are very small, they are potter regarding mice. If you took them from a tree when they're the size of a boiser or when they're the maturity level, they're like a boiser. So he says here that it's not, Rabbi Shimon holds you not chayv mice on that, because it's not really yet considered a fruit. Even though everyone agrees that usually you leave it on the tree to last longer, but the Chacham says looks at a fruit you chayv mice, and Rabbi Shimon says not chayv mice at all. Right, because he said right now it's not a Amle Abaye, so you want to compare the two. Amle Abaye, who says you compare the laws of mice to the laws of Esther? Dilma, loyi, maybe it's not so. What do you mean it's not so? Over here, when it comes to Esek, we require Hadar, and here there's no Hadar. Now, this is one of the reasons, or one of the proofs that Taisa brings, that the argument here is not about size, but about maturity, because previously the Gemara wanted to say that Yehuda and Amir are arguing Hadar, we concluded it has nothing to do with Hadar. They're arguing about the size, nothing to do with Hadar. Over here, we say clear because of Hadar. So therefore, it's a different argument altogether. Is it really Hadar to have a fruit that's not totally mature? Rabbi Kiva says, therefore, you cannot yaitze. What's up to do with Maisa? I will have some kirabalas related. When it comes to Maisa, maybe it's Rabbanan. It's a fruit. Okay, it will grow long. It can grow more, but right now it's already, it's a little bit it's considered fruit, and therefore you chai mice. Or I can argue the other way around as well. After like what I'm sure some, what I'm sure said you chai mice, and it's like acid to acid. It's called tfuas zarecha. You should go ahead and you should give mice from all the two of your seeds. All the two of your zarecha that you're going to use to plant others. That what's the normal fruit you take when you want to go and plant? Yes, the fruit has to be complete. When it comes to esek, we don't have that criteria that has to be towards aracha. So therefore, maybe he agrees that this esek is still kosher. The sula immediate. If there's nothing to talk about, nothing to discuss, they have totally two unrelated arguments. Then the Brisa said, God, he put it into a form. But also, he made it, he reshaped it. Apostle is apostle. Amar was a revelation. Well, can be very acheres. In fact, it looks like it takes on another form. I will kibriyasai, but let's say after you shaped it, it still looks like an esek. Then kosher. Then Peter, what's it chiddush? Can mean very acheres. It says clearly that it's like a very acheres. That means if it took on another form. But if it didn't take on another form, it's still all right. It's an esek, but you made it actually like a watermill that protrudes, it goes in, concave, convex. So therefore, because it goes in and goes out, you pressed in part of it. So when you press in part of it, the other part between the pressing ins comes protrude. So it looks a little bit different than an ordinary esek. We thought it's possible that it is kosher.
I think you would call it corrugated.
Is that what it's called? Okay.
That's like the metal, the roofs that are.
I know. Yeah. Okay, could be just called a corrugated thing. Now, by an esrig, one of the four signs between an esrig and an esrig hamurkav, or a lemon that was grafted together with an esrig, is one of the signs is the skin of the outer skin. By a lemon, it's very smooth, and by an esrig, it's very rough. Because we do already have by an esrig, the skin is rough, and there are all these protrusions. Now, you accentuate it here by doing this kind of form. Then it's still kosher. You accentuate it's still kosher, because it ultimately retains the identity of an esrig. You didn't shape it to something else. Studying more further, eat what we learn. There'll be two views of how to learn this. Esrig and esrig, shenikubu ach body mice have bitten into an esrig. Omar Rav says Rav ein zeh hodor. Rav says it's lacking in hodor, and therefore it's not a kosher esrig. Says the Gemara, how does that fit in with what Rab Chanina did? Rab Chanina used to have a very interesting custom. Matuba, he used to eat the esrig, and Rashi says why he says dipping, because that's quite common to dip. He used to dip the esrig, the nafigba. And then he would dip whatever's left of the esrig, he would use the following day to make the bracha on esrig, even though it had a hole from his teeth. Says the Gemara, so Rav doesn't agree. How's Rav going to fit with Rab Chanina? But before you get to that, there's a bigger problem. How does Rab Chanina fit with our Mishnah? Well, Chanina Kashim says clearly on Mishnah, there's a hole. The esrog is not valid, and he took a bite, and then he went and used the esrog. His Bishleim says something like Kasha Mishnah is not a problem. Can be Yom Tov Rishon, can be Yom Tov Sheni. Here's a clear proof to Taisus, who says at the beginning of this parak that Hodor, those mitzvahs which are a requirement as because of the Hodor, only applies to the first day of Yom Tov Sukkot, not for Chol Hamoed. And therefore, a whole. The problem is hadar. If the problem, no, when it comes to carrying 4 minim, which is lekachtem, lekichatama, that applies. The entire sukkahs, even the days that are only rabban. But those requirements which are there because of hadar, doesn't matter. You're allowed to have esrog the whole last days of Yom Tov. Onwards. So Rab Chanina makes sense. Our Mishnah is talking about the first day, he did it the next few days. El Rav Kash. But Rav, how is he going to explain the behavior of Rabbi Chanina? He just said that he punctured mice. And obviously Rav is talking about the rest of Sukkot, because if it's talking about the first day, what's punctured mice? Who cares how it's punctured? It's possible. It's no good. So must be talking about the rest of Sukkot. And Rabbi Chanina, the rest of Sukkot, used to take a bite. Rav will say, shiny achborim de misi. I agree with Rabbi Chanina. Taking a bite yourself and then using the rest of the essence, the rest of Yom Tov, it's lacking in other, big deal. But mice, and you're going to make a brach on it, that is despicable. That's repulsive. Use an estig that a mice bit from, and then you can go ahead to the miskite. Then you can go ahead and you can make a bracha on it. That is mis. That's what Rabbi Rav was saying. So they're not talking about the same situation. Says the Gemara, that's one shot. There's another shot. Interesting. Rashi says that the main problem with the esrig, that a mice bit into it, is not the problem is you're doing a mitzvah and a mice bit into it, it's miyas. Rashi said because you're making a bracha and you're mentioning Hashem's name, that's the problem. Not the mitzvah itself, it's the bracha that you're making with it that's the problem. Yeah, and Rashi said anything. For example, yavesh, a dry lulav is possible. And why? Because you need hadar and it's missing. And the problem is, it's lacking. The problem is the bracha, where it's not nice. Where it's not nice, and the bracha, you can make a bracha and use neighbor's name. It's inappropriate. So more further, you could have another version of it. Rav said the other way around. He said actually it's all right. You can still use it. But I'll prove it to you. Chanina used to go ahead, bite the esrog, and then he used to use the rest. Chanina kasha must be in housing limb shop. Kasha, every other come to change. Talking about the second day until then you're allowed to. So Rav then, in the second version, actually holds there's no difference between whether mice bit it into it or whether you bite into it. In both cases, the rest of Yom Tov you can use the esrog. It doesn't matter if it's lacking. Yeah. So more right. Now, Rabbi Chanina, the way Rashi learns that Rabbi Chanina was saying the problem of having a hole is you need lekachtem lekicha tam, you need a whole lekicha, and there's missing, and that only is only a chsar on the first day and not the rest of it. Rav comes along and says the problem here is not when a mice bit into it. It's not just a problem of lacking in size or missing. It's the problem is that it's me. It's just lacking in hadar. And hadar is an issue that is prevalent throughout the entire Sukkot. Says Rashi, B'haraya yavesh is possible. And the problem is it's not hadar, but when it comes to a mice, what do you call it? And with Chanina, what he did was when he took a bite into it, the problem there was it's not whole, and it's not a question of hadar, it's a question of whole, and whole is not an issue only the first day.
So if you would have had not mice, let's say birds biting into it, would it be different legabe the bracha or just dafke mice?
That I'm not sure. I haven't seen him talk about it, but I'm not sure. Is it because mice itself is a miyasa thing? Sheretz. The Torah calls it a sheretz, creepy crawly, versus maybe a bird might be different. Yeah, don't know. We learned about esek cut. It says if you have sharpened stones that they used to use, they didn't have toilet paper, so they used these smooth rock to go ahead, pebbles, to go ahead and wipe themselves after they had to defecate. So the same machlekes I had here regarding these small stones, the size of the stones, the same machlekes I had regarding these stones on Shabbos. Now on Shabbos, all the bathrooms are usually outside the neighborhood. So with a stone, there's two problems. If you had to carry more than 4 amos, it's a carmelis, you're carrying more than 4 amos, which needs to the rabbanon. Plus, the additional thing is it's muktzah. It's muktzah machmas atzmoy. Remember, anything which is not a keli is muktzah on Shabbos. Muktzah machmas atzmoy. So therefore, that's muktzah. But we have a concept called kavod abrius. The dignity of a human overrides these things. It overrides. And Tasha says that carmelis is less of an issa than muktzah, but it overrides both. And the question is, what size of these pebbles are valid? So Gimel Avonim Mikuzol Mutal Hachbez Kisei B'Shabbos. It says over there that you're allowed to bring 3 of these stones with you into the bathroom. The Kama Shiyudin, what size? Rab Meir says the egg the size of an odd. He holds that this is only pebbles, small pebbles are suitable, but larger pebbles are not suitable. And Abuda says kibeya. Abuda says even the size of an egg is still good. It's still all right. Says the Gemara, Godel, how big can it be? How big can it be when we say an esrog? We had a machlek the size of an esrog. We had 2 opinions. One is that to hold 2 in one hand, or you can even have 1 in 2 hands. And the reason we gave why you need 2 in one hand is not because of hadar, but because in case you put the esrog, somebody put the esrog in the wrong hands and you have to swap. You have to be able to hold both in one hand as you're swapping. Tanya, now the story of Rabbi Yossi said, the story of Rabbi Kiva once went to shul, the esrog al kseifah. He had an esrog that was huge, and he had to carry it on his shoulder like a watermelon. So he used that as a proof that you can have a large esrog, and there's no maximum. That's your proof. You weren't there, but they actually told him that this is not considered hadr to have such a large fruit. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda's problem is not hadr. Rabbi Yehuda's problem is because he might swap hands. But he's saying to Rabbi Yossi, you're not worried about the swapping hands, but your hadr is an issue. And l'chayda, what kind of hadr is this when it's so large? It's not nice. Just because it's big doesn't mean it's necessarily nice. Mishnah. Now that we finished learning each of the daled minim and all the psulim, now we learn about all the minim together. We already had this previously. You do not tie a lulav ella b'minute, only using its own kind. David Rabbi Yehuda. If you remember, Rabbi Yehuda holds tying a lulav is a mitzvah. If you can use a different species, then you can have 5, even though it's horizontal. Not that they're your lesson, but since it's a mitzvah, it makes it chashuv. Suddenly you have 5 species. So you should use one of these 4. However, Rab Meir says, I feel you can use a string or a rope. You can use them as well. Anything. In fact, there's a story about you know how they started to love him? The Gimoini with golden strands. That's what it was beautiful. That's what they used to tie the lulav. That's not right. But they did it correctly. They had to use one of the minim, like the lulav, and tied all the minim together. Then over and above that, they also put a nice little string around it. Says the Gemara, Omar Rava, says Rava, afilu b'siv. When we say that you can use, let's say, like a lulav, it doesn't have to be the lulav part itself. It could be even from the tree itself, even that which winds its way around the tree. Or afilu be'ikra the dikla, or even, let's say, branches from the tree itself or from the bark of the tree. Any part of the tree is good enough. And it has nothing to do with hadar. It has to do with we don't want a 5th min. My time here was svarik sabar here. Lulav has to be tied. If you bring another species, have a chamisha mini. If you bring another kind, then you can have 5, and that's about toisev. And therefore you're not even going to be yaitze what you did because they're all tied together. Is kolamoisav gedeya. Stop shot you were yaitze your mitzvah and then you added something. You know what I mean? Yaitze mitzvah. How do I know the siva the ikar dilamin lovely? How do I know that? Maybe when he says it has to be a lulav, even the part that you used to tie should be from the lulav part of the tree, not from the other parts. The time we learn about Sukah Daf, a very interesting machlek is it says in the pasuk you should sit inside a sukkah. Remember, sukkah is the schach. Sukah shakol davar. Can be from any type. You can use any type as long as it meets the criteria, which we learned before. It has to be Gedulei Karka. It shouldn't be Makabel Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein Sukkah Neheges Ella Bedalad Mina Shabalulus. If you holds that we'll see later in the morning, it's the schach, has to be one of the 4 kinds. That's what you have to use as schach. And if I didn't know, I have a Kabbalah and Pashut logic. Which is stricter? Of course, a sukkah. Because Lulav is limited a mitzvah only during the day. And yet, you have very strict rules as to what you can use for your lulav. Sukkah where you sit there by day and by night. Surely you only use these 4 minutes. The whole shakvatay nachroinim if you can use an esrig as your schach, because an esrig is can become makabel tumah, right? A fruit if it comes wet and then you're happy makabel tumah. So there's a machlekes whether. Since the Buddha holds, I will soon see that you can use these 4 minim, maybe that overrides the other law that says that you shouldn't have something which is mekabel tumah. Amrullah, they said to him, and we had exactly the same discussion of Psachim, when Rabbi Yehuda says that he should use the only kind, ein bil chametz el sreifa, and he says, kal v'chomer, just like, and they said to him, on the contrary, you're trying to be machmir, you're actually being mekel. Just like over there, they said, what happens? You have no wood, you do nothing. At least according to us, mefader v'zer l'ruach, you crumble it, you throw it into the wind. Yeah, at least, you're doing something to destroy the chametz. The same issue here. Omro said to him, so you're trying to be machmer that the schach should be one from the 4 species. And what have you don't have? No sukkah. So what kind of chumrah is that? Holding any kavachayim. The whole idea of kavachayim is that you're learning something stricter from something lenient. But the end result is that you're being lenient. Surely, the din should be that what happens when matzah is anything is not a kavachayim. What happens when matzah abbas minim? Let's say you can't find any of the 4 kinds, to cover your entire roof. You should sit outside of a sukkah. The hatayda amra basukkah teishiv yamim. Sukkah shekoldov, you have to sit in the sukkah. A kal v'chaymer where you're trying to be strict, it turns out to be that you're being lenient. That's not a kal v'chaymer. That's not much a kal v'chaymer. V'chein be'ezra, then they bring a proof. By Ezra, again, you should really learn this part of Ezra where he goes through all the Yom Tov what they should do. So by Ezra, it says in the pasuk, he told them, okay, now we have to build sukkahs, and he said to them, I want you to go out there and go to the mountains. So Tzuahar, go to the mountains, the Heviah, bring ale zayis, leaves of an olive tree, the ale ate shemen, and leaves some oil trees. Not sure exactly which tree that is. And the ale hadas, and trees from azasim, the ale tamarim, and trees from palm tree, which is a lulav. The ale ate of us is again hadassim. We already had the Gemara. What's the chiluk in hadas ate of us, and we said one is regular hadassim and one is hadas shaita. And the hadas shaita, as far as chach is concerned, is good enough. But you see, included here was ale zayis. So you didn't only use the materials for the dollar minute. You used other materials. You used leaves from an olive tree or an eight shemen. So doesn't that disprove Rabbi Yehuda? So he vasu sukkahs, and go ahead and build yourself a sukkahs. So he says, Kakaso Rabbi Yehuda, so but he holds hani litfanis. He says no. The first two things, which is the olive and the eight shemen, that's for the walls of the sukkah because we don't care what you use. Oh, but ale hadas, ale tamarim, ale each of us l'schach. When it comes to schach, use only those things which are kosher for the Arba minute. He doesn't mention your esrogim. So maybe taka esrogim, like those achreim hold that esrogim, you cannot use on the sukkah at all. So just finish the Gemara. Says the Gemara, but Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah before, Mesachim Nesarim, you're allowed to cover your roof with planks of boards. Alma, the boards. And that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said it has to be the 4 minimum. Must be obviously from the trees that you use for the 4 minimum. Alma l'chayda see the ikar dikla min l'lavu shmamina. So Rabbi said, this is my proof that when we say that you have to use the lulav, it doesn't mean the lulav itself. It can be any part of that tree. Because Rabbi Yehuda insists that the lulav should be the schach, and yet he says you can use ikar dikla, you can use boards. So therefore, when you want to tie around the sukkah, around the lulav, 3 minimum doesn't have to be one of the leaves of the lulav itself. It can be any part of the tree. Says the Gemara quickly, Umi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Abbas min in midachin. Rabbi Yehuda says only these 4 minutes. But Tanya, we learned with Fedish, Sichacha, let's say if you covered your sukkah, Benesarim shall erez, you covered with boards made out of cedar tree, she yet without tvachim, if 4 tvachim, why give hack of sulah? Maybe we would have Bryce said the argument that Rabbi Shmuel, when the Rabbi Yehuda made argue, only 4 tvachim and greater, or even 3 to 4, or only 3 to 4. So it says in the Bryce here, if you use boards that are 4 tvachim greater, everyone agrees possible. Ain't without tvachim. If there's no 4 tvachim, Rabbi Meir posel and Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi Yehuda Meir says it's posel, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. Umoyed Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is moydish. Im yesh bein nesel and nesel kemal and nesel. There's a gap between the boards where you fill up with kosher schach. Sheminich pesach, and then you put in kosher schach. Like shade is kosher. So l'chayda, we see clearly from here, you use cedar trees, not from the Arba Minim. And says the Gemara, my edes hadas. One of the trees that are called edes, a very strong tree, is also a hadas. There are 10 kinds of trees. Now it says a pasuk, etain b'midbar edes. I will place in the midbar edes, and it goes through a whole list of things. And one of them is shita, another one is a hadas. Clearly, that edes can include a hadas. Rabbi Yehuda, when he said a razim, it means a hadas. Okay, we'll stop here.